Welcome to CompuScholar's Professional Development webinar for October 2024. Today we're going to be talking about using Visual Studio Code with the Unity development environment. Today we're going to cover the Microsoft announcement regarding support for Visual Studio Community and the impact on our Unity course. We'll talk about the difference between Visual Studio Code and Visual Studio Community Edition, and we'll look at making the best selection of a scripting IDE for your operating system. We'll do a super quick walkthrough of the installation process for Visual Studio Code, and then we'll show you how it works within the Unity IDE. So the big news from Microsoft is that as of August 2024, they are not going to support the Visual Studio Community IDE on Mac OS. So that means you can't install it, you can't download it, and if you're a Mac OS user and you're installing Unity, then you won't have that option as part of the installation process. So naturally this has some impact on CompuScholar's Unity game programming course. If you're a Mac OS student currently in the course and you've already installed Visual Studio Community, you can probably continue using that without any difficulty. However, if you're a new Mac OS user or you're newly installing a Unity development environment on a new computer, then if you're a Mac student, then you have to use Visual Studio Code because Visual Studio Community Edition is simply not supported anymore. We have naturally updated the course to account for this. There's some small tweaks in place right now. So when you go to the Chapter 1 installation activity, you'll see some updated installation instructions for Mac OS users, and we've made a few notes and screenshot updates in some key spots just to make sure Mac OS users know that they're going to be using Visual Studio Code instead of Visual Studio Community Edition. However, the course is still largely based around Visual Studio Community Edition in terms of the screenshots and the demonstration videos and so forth, and we do have larger revisions planned for the summer of 2025. So what's the difference between Visual Studio Community and Visual Studio Code? They're both Microsoft IDEs that can be used to edit scripts. The Community Edition is larger and more complex and has a lot more professional features, and the Visual Studio Code is smaller and simpler with fewer features. In both cases, you can build, run, and debug multiple languages like C#, and in both cases you have Unity support as well. We've heard from some teachers that Visual Studio Code can be a little bit trickier to use, especially around the debugging features, but we anticipate that will get better over time. So our course material will most likely support both of these development options going forward. So right now, if you're a Windows user and you're about to install Unity, your choice of a scripting development environment is pretty straightforward. The Unity installer will actually install Visual Studio Community by default. So there's a checkbox within the installation program for Visual Studio Community. You should leave that checked to continue installing and using this development environment. If you do want to use Visual Studio Code instead, then you would uncheck that box and then you would install Visual Studio Code separately. If you're a Mac OS user, again, you won't have that Visual Studio Community option at all. You must install Visual Studio Code or some other script editor if you like as a separate process. Unity as a development environment is pretty flexible, so if you do have the technical expertise and a preference for some other scripting IDE or some other text editor that you want to use to edit your scripts, then you're certainly welcome to do that. Okay, let's do a quick walkthrough of the installation process. Again, as a Windows user, you're going to have Visual Studio Community by default, but what we're going to do is show you how to install Visual Studio Code separately if you want to use that for Windows. And then for Mac OS users, we do have detailed installation instructions. See the Chapter 1 activity within our Unity game programming course if you're a Mac user, and that will walk you through installing Visual Studio Code step by step after you've installed the Unity IDE. Let's flip over and take a look at the Unity Hub for just a moment. If we click on Installs, and then as a Mac user, if you click the little gear icon and then Add Modules, you'll have the opportunity to install Visual Studio Code. That option is not available for Windows users, so we'll need to install Unity separately as a Windows user. We're looking at code.visualstudio.com. That's the homepage for Visual Studio Code. You can most likely just click the download button here to get the appropriate version of the development environment for your operating system, but you can also click on the download button over here on the right, and you've got the separate download options for the different operating systems like Windows, Linux, or Mac OS. So we'll go ahead and download the Windows version, and this will give you a little setup executable. and then just run that executable when it's finished downloading. This is a pretty quick and straightforward download and installation process, so I'm just going to skip through the details pretty quickly, accept the agreement, leave some boxes checked here, click Next, and install. And again, this will take just a few minutes. And when we're done, we're going to go ahead and launch Visual Studio Code. And I should mention you'll want to do this with all of your Unity software completely shut down, so make sure your hub is not running. Make sure you've stopped any versions of the Unity IDE that you are currently running. So you want to do this installation without any entanglements with running Unity software. So let's go ahead and launch the Visual Studio Code. Alright, this is the default development environment, and we do, as a one-time process, need to install a couple of extensions. So we'll click on Extensions. And I've actually already installed them here on this computer, but what you're going to do is search for the C# extension, so you can just type C# up here, and you want to get the C# based language support from Microsoft, so there'll be a little toggle. You just click the install button, and again you want the certified Microsoft C# extension. And then if we come up here and type Unity, we again want the Unity extension, that certified extension from Microsoft. You might find some other Unity related things from other people, but this is the one that you want. So just make sure both of these are installed. Okay, once you have C# and Unity installed, you're ready to go. So we'll shut down the scripting editor for a moment. And we'll go back to the hub, and we're going to launch a project. And I'm going to go ahead and launch just a quick project that we have. Notice I've installed a pretty recent version of the 2022 edition of the Unity IDE. So we do recommend just go ahead and grabbing the latest version of the 2022 edition that you have. Unity has very recently announced Unity version 6, so we have not updated the course material to Unity version 6 yet, so we'd recommend installing the latest version of 2022. Let's go ahead and open this project. Alright, and once your project is open, the first thing I want to do is go to the Preferences. On Windows, that's Edit and then Preferences. And you'll click on External Tools, and then look at your external script editor, and you want to select Visual Studio Code. So you may have previously installed Visual Studio Community, but once you install Visual Studio Code, you should have that as an option, so just select Visual Studio Code, and then close that out. And now we can just double click on a script, and the script has been loaded into Visual Studio Code. Now the development environment here for the scripts looks a little bit different than Visual Studio Community Edition, but you can do all basically the same things. You've got a tabbed interface here in the middle, so you can open multiple script files and switch back and forth between them. You have a list of problems here at the bottom, so you can go check out problems, like if we intentionally add a syntax error here, and we'll show you that syntax error. So it has build and compilation features that are comparable to Visual Studio Community Edition. If you do make changes to the script file, you can simply save those changes, and then when you switch back to the Unity IDE, it will automatically load those script changes and you'll be ready to run. So that works just like Visual Studio Community. If we go back to the development environment, the next interesting thing is debugging. So you can do debugging as well. So if we just come over here, I'm going to click to add a breakpoint into my update method. And then I'm going to click on the run and debug command and attach to Unity. After you select it attach to Unity, just hit the little green arrow here and you should see attach to Unity at the bottom. After that, we can switch back to the Unity IDE. We'll run the game. And you can see we're now paused here in the debugger. We've hit this breakpoint in the update method, so the yellow line is highlighted. And it has all the basic features you would expect for a debugger. You can hover your mouse over variables and get little pop-ups. You can add and remove breakpoints. There's a little command bar up here that you can use to step over specific commands, step into functions, step out of functions, or just continue running. So we can remove the breakpoint and then continue running. And now our script is running here. So generally speaking, it is just that easy to use Visual Studio Code with the Unity development environment. The big picture steps again are making sure you have selected the Visual Studio Code editor as your external tool in your preferences. You also need to make sure you have installed the C# base language support and the Unity integration option from Microsoft. And then you'll be all set. Now, Visual Studio Code and Unity working together is a relatively new event in the grand scheme of things, so we expect further developments in the area. If you have specific experience with Visual Studio Code and you'd like to share some of that with us, we're happy to hear from you. If you have tips or updates that we can share with our other teachers, we'd love to receive those as well. We appreciate your time as always. Thank you so much for watching, and you're welcome to contact us by phone or through our website.